Welcome to this conversation with Jean-Claude Mourlevat, laureate of the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award 2021. First and foremost, welcome Jean-Claude Mourlevat, and warmest congratulations from us all in the jury and from all of us in Sweden. I would just say some words about this conversation, and then we'll go into speak a little bit about the award. I think we have 1 hour approximately, and we would also use an interpreter, Ms. Stephanie Johnson, who will translate from French into English. I will pose the questions in English, and Jean-Claude Mourlevat will answer them in French. So, some words about the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. It was founded in 2002 by the Swedish government in order to honor the memory of Astrid Lindgren. And it's awarded to authors, illustrators, and reading promoting organizations. And the prize amount is 5 million Swedish crowns. That is, I think, 462,000 euros. And Jean-Claude Mourlevat is our 21st laureate. He has published more than 30 books in different genres, and they are translated into into 30 languages. And the latest language, I think, is Swedish. And the latest book is Jefferson, published in 2018. And we will talk about that a little bit later. First of all, Jean-Claude Mourlevat, what was your reaction when I called you at the end of March? I know that you knew already when I made a phone call, but could you please share your immediate reaction or feelings with us?
Je ne savais pas, je m'en doutais un peu puisque vous avez essayé de me joindre désespérément pendant une demi-heure et j'étais injoignable parce que j'étais à l'enterrement de ma tante, qui est également ma marraine, et c'était un jour triste pour moi. Et en sortant du cimetière, sur mon portable, j'ai vu qu'il y avait 5 messages de mon éditeur qui me demandaient d'appeler d'urgence en Suède. Et j'ai imaginé que peut-être le miracle venait de s'accomplir.
In fact, I didn't actually know. I sort of thought that it had in fact happened. I know that you had tried desperately to reach me, and unfortunately it was a sad day because I was at the burial of and the funeral of my aunt, who was also my godmother. So it was a rather sad day for me. And coming out of the cemetery, I saw that there were some 5 messages on my cell phone of my editor and my publisher, who said you have to call Sweden right away. So I imagined that the miracle had taken place.
Right. Yes. Well, then it was indeed a day of contrast, I can imagine. And also, I suspect there was a lot of attention later on from newspapers and radio, television, and so on. And I think the Swedish media, they were very quick to call you, because I listened to an interview with you on the radio. It was just, I think, 1 or 2 hours after. So that was really great for us to hear you on the radio. And this year is quite different, of course, has been quite different. And we have had an award ceremony just a week ago, and it was on the screen, of course. And it was, of course, different from a normal year, so to speak. But the crown princes were there to give you the diplomas by magic, they said, and to congratulate you. And then we also heard your own speech, your speech when you have got the award. And we were so impressed here in Sweden by your speech for many reasons, but perhaps we were just stunned when you began. Can you please tell us about that? About your speech and the beginning?
Bien sûr. Oui. Pardonnez-moi, je vais revenir un peu en arrière parce que je n'ai pas vraiment répondu à votre toute première question sur ma réaction quand j'ai su que j'étais le lauréat du prix. Et c'est étrange parce que ça a été une réaction physique, en fait. Comme si ma chimie avait un peu changé. C'était quelque chose de vraiment spectaculaire. C'est comme lorsqu'on apprend une nouvelle extraordinaire, une mauvaise nouvelle aussi. Par exemple, vous apprenez la mort accidentelle de quelqu'un qui vous est cher, et il y a une sorte de vibration, quelque chose ça ne passe pas encore par le cerveau, c'est physique, on se sent un peu vacillé. J'ai ressenti ça lorsque j'ai compris que j'étais le lauréat du prix Astrid Lindgreen. Et ça a été une réaction physique. Et seulement ensuite, j'ai pris conscience et j'ai réfléchi à ce que ça représentait, à ce que ça signifiait. Mais c'est mon corps qui a d'abord parlé.
I'd like to go back a bit because, in fact, I didn't really answer your question about what my reaction was when I heard that I, in fact, was the laureate of the Astrid Lindgren Prize. It's rather strange because my first reaction was a physical one. It's really as if something had sort of changed in my physical being. It's a bit like when you learn extraordinary piece of news, even a bad piece of news, for example, when you hear that somebody that is close to you has died accidentally, it was a sort of vibration in my body. My brain didn't really click in at the time. It was a physical reaction that almost destabilized me when I learned that I, in fact, had won the Astrid Lindgren Prize. And it was only later, in fact, that I actually fully became aware and started thinking about the fact that I had won the prize.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Yes, please.
Non, maintenant, ma réponse à votre question suivante sur la remise du prix et mon discours, mon speech, c'est ça?
Yes.
Alors, mon anglais n'est pas très bon. Mon anglais est suffisant pour une conversation entre amis, mais pour mon speech, à l'occasion de la remise du prix, j'ai dû apprendre mon speech par cœur en anglais. Et j'ai voulu, pour rendre hommage au jury suédois, dire une phrase en suédois, assez longue. Mais j'ai sous-estimé la difficulté de l'entreprise. J'ai mis 2 semaines, je crois, pour apprendre cette phrase courte, mais je me suis beaucoup amusé. Et je pensais qu'elle allait être sous-titrée d'ailleurs en anglais, mais elle ne l'était pas. Donc beaucoup de gens qui ont assisté à la remise du prix et à mon speech n'ont pas compris ce qu'elle signifiait.
Let me get back to the question that you asked about me winning the prize and the award-winning ceremony. In fact, my English is okay for a conversation among friends, but to be able to deliver a speech at an award ceremony, well, I had to, quite frankly, learn it by heart. But also to honor the jury, I wanted to say something in Swedish, and I did, in fact, learn a rather long sentence in Swedish. I'd rather underestimated the difficulty of actually doing this, and it took me about 2 weeks of pretty hard work to do so. But anyway, I thought that everybody would in fact have understood it, but I realized that in fact not many people did in fact get their head around it.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to add that you can listen to Jean-Claude Mourlevat's speech on the website of Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, as well as you can see the award ceremony. And finally, about the award, do you have any reflections about the significance of the award for children's literature or for literature for young adults, for you and perhaps generally?
Alors, d'une façon générale, d'ailleurs, dans mon speech, j'ai dit que j'étais admiratif du gouvernement suédois qui, en 2002, a créé ce prix. Et c'est vrai, c'est sincère, je suis admiratif. C'est toute la différence qu'il y a entre les bonnes intentions et la décision politique. Parce que tout le monde dit que la littérature pour les enfants et les jeunes lecteurs et lectrices, c'est important, ah oui, c'est magnifique, il faut faire quelque chose, il faut l'encourager. En Suède, ils sont allés beaucoup plus loin que ça. Ils ont donc eu la décision politique de créer ce prix extraordinaire, de le doter presque à hauteur du prix Nobel de littérature générale. Et je suis vraiment impressionné par ça. Et évidemment, d'un point de vue plus personnel, je suis très, très reconnaissant, puisque ce qui me concerne, c'était absolument inespéré. Je savais bien que j'étais dans la sélection, mais l'idée que je pourrais être le lauréat m'était absolument étrangère. Il était arrivé parfois dans ma famille qu'on puisse jouer avec l'idée que peut-être, si j'avais le prix, c'est avec un si majuscule, évidemment, ça n'arrivera pas. C'est un jeu, on s'amuse à penser si je l'avais. Et puis brusquement, le téléphone sonne à la sortie du cimetière et je l'ai. C'est absolument bouleversant.
In general, in fact, and I did say this in my speech, that I said that I really admired the Swedish government that had decided in 2002 to award this prize. And in fact, I was full of admiration, and I say so again, because it's so very different between just good intentions and actually doing something and bringing in a policy, because everybody says that children's literature is very important, that it has to be promoted and that it's magnificent and so on, but and they encourage it. But the Swedish government went further than that and actually instituted the prize, and in other words, they put into practice a political decision, and a very important one as well, because it is almost on a par with the Nobel Prize for Literature for adults. And so I really was very and am very impressed indeed. And of course, from a personal point of view, I'm very grateful. And it was quite something that I didn't really expect to get. It was something that I didn't really hope for. I knew I was on the list, but the actual idea that I might win it was quite foreign to me. And in our family, for example, we played around with the idea sometimes that, yes, you know, it would be fantastic if you got it, but it was an if with a very big capital letter. And we sort of just amused ourselves thinking about what it would be like. And then, of course, the telephone rang when I left the cemetery, and I had it, and that was fantastic.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Well, let's move on to your books. And I would like to say, talk a little about your background. You have been a teacher in German, I think, and an actor and also a director. You have written plays, and you also acted as a clown. And I imagine that all this had been of importance for your work as an author. And I was just wondering if you have any reflections about this connection, your different work within theater perhaps above all. So that is my question. And then I would like to move on to a book called L'Enfant, The Pearl of the Ocean, because I think it's perhaps a little bit theatrical. You can see it as there are dramatic acts in it. But that's a lot of things. So you begin just where you want.
C'est vrai que j'ai été pendant quelques courtes années professeur d'allemand. Et j'ai été un professeur heureux, ça m'a plu, j'ai adoré enseigner, puis j'ai voulu faire autre chose, et en particulier du théâtre. J'ai fait du théâtre, c'est vrai. J'ai vécu de ça pendant 13 ans, 14 ans, je ne sais plus, et j'ai évidemment adoré ça, surtout la mise en scène. J'ai adoré mettre en scène, plus que jouer moi-même. J'étais un comédien moyen, j'étais pas mauvais, pas très bon, j'étais moyen, et ce sont des professions où être moyen ne sert à rien. J'étais, je pense, j'étais trop dans ma tête et pas assez dans mon corps. Les comédiens sont dans leur corps. Bien. Et j'ai commencé à écrire à 40 ans seulement, c'est-à-dire très tard. Et on me dit souvent, ah oui, vous écrivez pour les jeunes lecteurs parce que vous avez été professeur. Je dis non, ça n'a pas de lien. Le lien, il est beaucoup plus avec le théâtre. Et lorsque j'écris, j'ai les réflexes d'un homme de théâtre, c'est-à-dire j'essaie de faire en sorte que mon écriture soit toujours tendue entre le lecteur et moi. Comme lorsqu'on est sur la scène, on doit maintenir ce lien tendu entre les spectateurs et soi-même. Et s'il ne l'est pas, ce lien, si ça ne marche pas bien, on le ressent douloureusement et physiquement. Et quand j'écris, je me relis beaucoup, bien sûr. Et dès lors que je trouve qu'une page est, j'allais dire, molle, c'est-à-dire pas assez tendue, je me dis, il manque quelque chose, ou il y a quelque chose en trop, peut-être. Mais j'essaie de tendre pour ne pas perdre mes lecteurs. Ma hantise, c'est de perdre mes lecteurs. Comme lorsqu'on parle, on essaie, on n'y arrive pas toujours, mais on essaie d'être intéressant. Et si on ne l'est pas, on le voit bien au visage des gens, à leurs yeux. Dans l'écriture, pour moi, c'est la même chose. Et ça me vient du théâtre.
Okay. It's true that, in fact, I was for a small number of years a professor of German, and I was very happy at doing it. I love teaching, but then I also really, my first love is the theatre, and I did, in fact, live by being in the theatre for some 13, 14 odd years, and I adored that. And I adored especially the mise en scène, the putting things on the stage rather than actually myself being an actor. I'm not a bad actor, I'm only an average actor, and has to admit that. And quite frankly, in certain professions, just being average is not sufficient. And perhaps because also I was too much in my head, whereas actors have to very much be aware and act through their bodies. And I started writing only at 40 years, so fairly late on. And very often people say to me, oh, you're a writer because you were a professor, you were a teacher before, but that in fact is not the essential link. The essential link with my writing is theatre, and when I write, I have the same reflexes and I think about what it's like to be in the theatre. In other words, my writing has to develop that sort of tension and link between the reader and myself, just like in the theatre, where the actor has to develop that special link and extension with the spectators, with the viewers. And if that doesn't come about, you feel it immediately. And when I write, of course, I reread a lot. And if I read something, a page, and I think that, you know, it's just too, it doesn't work, it's just too sort of soft, if you like, there isn't that tension there, or there's perhaps too much, then I know it's not going to work. So that's what I've always tried to do, to develop that link with my reader. And my great fear, of course, is that you don't achieve that. And so, oh no, sorry. Again, just to repeat, I see my writing more linked to the theatre.
Yes, that was very interesting. I think you talked about the mise en scène, to be a director. Do you think that's some kind of a link there between the author and the director, that you're a mise en scène, you are the director of the story, of course, but is that, yeah. And this, in 1999, you published a book called L'Enfant Océan, and I think that was one of the first books you reach a wider audience with it. I have read, actually. And it's about 7 siblings leaving their home and their, well, cruel parents, cruel father. And I would just want to ask you quite simply, what is this story about? And is there any connections with the theater or the theater? Is it some kind of theatrical narrative in it?
Tout à fait. Ce roman, qui s'appelle donc L'enfant océan, est une réécriture du Petit Poucet, bien sûr, avec les 6 frères jumeaux, plus le petit dernier qui est le plus petit, le plus intelligent, qui est muet. Dans le conte de Charles Perrault, il est dit qu'il parle peu. Moi, j'ai poussé cela plus loin en disant qu'il était muet. Bon. Cette histoire m'est venue, hélas, par un événement réel qui s'est produit dans une école où je travaillais comme professeur. Et un matin, il y a un petit élève qui avait 10 ans ou 11 ans peut-être, qui est arrivé au collège sans cartable. Et on lui a demandé « Pourquoi est-ce que tu n'as pas ton cartable ?» Et le petit garçon a répondu « Mon père l'a jeté dans le puits. » Et ton père a jeté ton cartable dans le puits? Oui, c'était vrai. Cet enfant vivait dans une ferme à une dizaine de kilomètres de là. Ses parents, le père était un homme brutal, violent. La mère ne valait guère mieux, à mon avis, et il était en grande difficulté. Et un jour, donc, le père a jeté le cartable de son fils dans le puits. Vous imaginez bien l'émotion au collège, des professeurs, des enfants, c'était quelque chose de violent. Je ne l'ai jamais oublié. Et ensuite, 17 ans plus tard, je crois, quand j'ai dû écrire mon 3e roman, je ne sais pas pourquoi, j'ai repensé à ce petit garçon avec son cartable dans le puits. Je me suis rappelé aussi le conte du Petit Poucet, avec les 6 frères et plus le petit dernier. Je me suis rappelé aussi ma propre enfance, parce que je viens d'une famille nombreuse. Moi, je suis le 5e de 6. Et ces 3 choses-là, mises ensemble, c'est-à-dire le petit garçon avec son cartable dans le puits, le Petit Poucet, mes souvenirs d'enfance, ça a créé ce roman très étrange, avec 24 narrateurs et narratrices, je crois. Et si bien que... Et je l'ai écrit très, très vite. Je l'ai jeté comme ça, ce roman. Ce sont des gens qui parlent, vous l'avez dit, c'est comme du théâtre. Et avec toutes les fautes de français qui vont avec, ça ne me gênait pas. Et quand je suis arrivé au milieu du roman, j'ai eu des doutes. J'ai appelé mon éditrice et je lui ai dit ce que j'étais en train de faire et que j'allais peut-être arrêter parce que c'était très étrange. Elle m'a dit non, continue. Je l'ai fait, heureusement, puisque maintenant, l'enfant océan, on est arrivé là aux millions d'exemplaires vendus et il est devenu un petit classique dans les écoles françaises.
Okay, yes, definitely, and yes to the question that you asked. L'enfant océan, which is the pull of the ocean in English, in fact, it is something that goes back to Tom Thumb. It's the story of this, like Tom Thumb, the 6 brothers who are twins, and the very last one who is small and very intelligent. And in the story of Charles Perrault, he just says that the last Tom Thumb, the small one, spoke very little, but I changed it and made him a person who doesn't speak, somebody who is dumb. And the story came to me, unfortunately, in the wake of a very sad event that happened at the school where, in fact, I was a teacher. One morning, a young lad came in. He was about 10 or 11. He came to school. He was, of course, in the middle school, and he came without his school satchel. And so, people said to him, "Where's your satchel?" And he said, "Oh, my dad threw it out into the rain." And, we were all shocked and we said, "Is that true?" And it was true. This was a little boy who lived on a farm about 10 kilometers away. And his father was a violent, irascible man. And the mother wasn't much better, in my view. And he he, of course, was having a very difficult time. And, you know, his father chucked his satchel into the rain. And that was, of course, it created an enormous scandal in the school. Everybody was very shocked. And it's something that I have never forgotten. And 17 years later, when I came to write, I think it was my third novel, this sad story came back to me. And it was a combination of things. It was the Tom Thumb, the story of this little boy, and also my own childhood. I am the fifth of 6 children. So put all together, this was the novel, the strange novel that came out. It was almost as if it was being written by sort of 4 authors. I wrote it very, very quickly, and there is the link with the theatre. I just dashed it down, even with mistakes in French. But halfway through, I started having doubts about what I was doing, and I called my publisher and I said, well, I'm thinking of stopping. And she said, no, don't stop, continue, finish it. And luckily I did, because The Pull of the Ocean, in fact, has now sold 1 million copies, and it's become a classic in French schools.
Well, thank you very much. It was really interesting to get this background, because we discussed this book quite a lot in the jury, I can say. So I think everyone will be excited about this background for your fascinating book. You talked about your childhood also, and you said you grew up at a farm. Your father was a miller also, in the country, in the forest, and you had no books. And also later on you said that literature came as your salvation when you were young, and you were put in a boarding school for several years, and you were unhappy home, longing for home, and so on. And then you have pointed to the importance also of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, and the first meaning, the first sentence in this classic: I was born in the year in 1632 in the city of York. I know that this is a lot that I've now said, but if you just could comment a little bit around this, and why also, I'm so curious about this, about Robinson Crusoe, why this made such an impression on you.
Oui, je dois d'abord dire qu'en effet, je viens d'une famille, d'une fratrie sororie de 6, je suis le 5e, et mes parents ne lisaient pas, donc les livres sont entrés un peu dans la maison par mes frères et sœurs aînés, et on parlait beaucoup chez moi. Il y avait toujours du monde à table, et il y avait cette discussion toujours bruyante, animée avec mes frères et sœurs. C'était à qui serait le plus drôle, le plus inventif. Il y avait pas une compétition, mais une émulation, un désir d'animer la conversation. Et moi, j'ai adoré ça. Je suis très, très redevable à mes 5 frères et sœurs, énormément. À ma mère aussi, qui était une personne tout à fait inventive et sensible. Elle a rêvé d'être institutrice, mais elle n'a jamais pu l'être. Elle n'a jamais pu l'être. Elle a refoulé, réprimé toute sa vie une part d'elle-même qui était une part littéraire d'elle-même, qu'elle n'a pas pu exprimer. Je pense souvent à elle, même aujourd'hui. Mon père, lui, était un homme extrêmement généreux et énergique. Et, en revanche, il avait un intérêt médiocre pour ce qu'on appelle la culture, la littérature, ou même pas d'intérêt du tout. Mais j'ai eu, peut-être, je pense, l'immense chance de réunir ce côté littéraire de ma mère et l'énergie de mon père. Voilà, pour ce qui concerne le background familial. Je laisse Stéphanie traduire je reviendrai. Je suis trop long, hein, c'est ça?
No, no, ça va, ça va, ça.
Je reviendrai à l'enfant océan après.
Okay. Okay, so in fact, talking about my family, in fact, I do come from a large and rumbustious family. I'm the fifth of six, as I said. My parents didn't read. In fact, there weren't many books in the house. The books that came in came through my older brothers and sisters. But what we did do is we talked a great deal. There was almost always an animated conversation around the table, and there were many discussions that we had between my brothers and sisters, people always trying to be the funniest, always trying to be the most inventive. It wasn't exactly a competition, but it certainly there was an idea of emulating the others, and I desperately wanted to animate the conversation. I loved that. I loved the exchanges that we had, and I'm very, very grateful, and I owe a great deal to my brothers and sisters for that. And also I owe a great deal to my mother, who in fact was a very sensitive and a very inventive person. She in fact dreamed of being a teacher, but she of course couldn't realize her dream, and she sort of put that on a back burner, that literary side that she had to sort of bury it. I think a lot about her today and about that fact and that characteristic that she has. My father was a very generous person and full of energy, very energetic. He only had, if you like, a very average interest in sort of cultural aspects, but I think perhaps I'm lucky that I have joined together in myself the literary side of my mother and the energy of my father. So much for my background.
Et maintenant, Boel, je peux répondre à la question concernant Robinson Crusoe, c'est ça? Donc, en classe de... J'avais 10 ans quand on m'a envoyé dans un internat dans la petite ville voisine, et ça s'est très très mal passé pour moi. Je pensais que j'allais rejoindre mes frères et sœurs aînés, mais mes sœurs n'étaient pas là du tout, et mes frères étaient plus âgés que moi, donc je ne les côtoyais pas, et je me suis trouvé triste, isolé, malheureux, désespéré, et je voulais rentrer à la maison. Je me rendais malade, je voulais tellement être malade que je tombais vraiment malade. Donc on me ramenait à la maison, mon père venait me chercher dans son camion, pas très content, il me ramenait à la maison, je guérissais, on me ramenait à l'internat, je retombais malade, on me ramenait à la maison, je guérissais, etc. J'ai fait toute l'année comme ça, guéri, malade, malade, guéri, et j'ai redoublé ma classe de 6e, alors que j'étais un très bon élève à l'école primaire. Et puis, pendant l'hiver, est arrivé dans mes mains ce roman qui s'appelle Robinson Crusoe. Et j'ai été interpellé, j'ai été subjugué, parce que j'avais l'impression qu'une voix sortait. Il est écrit à la première personne, ce roman-là, c'est « je ». Et quelqu'un me parlait, c'était pour moi, c'était entre Robinson et moi, de solitude à solitude. Et j'ai pensé que c'était le plus beau livre du monde, je l'ai relu 3 fois, et je me disais que c'était peut-être inutile d'en lire d'autres. J'en ai quand même lu d'autres après.
Now to come to my school life. In fact, I was 10 when I was sent to boarding school in the nearby village, and I didn't like it at all. I was terribly, terribly unhappy. My sisters weren't there, and I thought I would be with my brothers, but of course they were older, and so I didn't mix with them. So I was really sad. Felt isolated and very, very unhappy, and I desperately wanted to go back home, and I so much wanted to get sick that I did get sick. My father came and collected me in his truck, and we went home, and then I got better again, so got sent back to boarding school, and there I got sick again and was sent home to get better again, and it went on like that for the whole school year. In fact, I even had to repeat the 6th class, the 6e, even if I was a good pupil because, you know, I had all these ups and downs. And then one winter, I just happened to have a book, you know, Robinson Crusoe, and I felt that it really spoke to me. I felt that the book was addressing me, and the subject was me. It's written, of course, in the first person, and I just thought that it was immediately Robinson Crusoe talking to me, two solitudes talking one with the other, and I read it straight off 3 times, because that was the book that interested me. Of course, after that I read several more.
Thank you. Well, it's when you read your books, and all of the books, it becomes quite not obvious, but it's evident that literature has a very important place in your writing. I mean, writing literature is meaning something in your books, and it's meaning something for the characters in the books. And I was thinking about the Great Library, for example, in Le Chagrin du Roi Mort, and also the picture book Le Petit Royaume. And I was quite, when I read Le Chagrin du Roi Mort, I was quite a little bit shocked when the library burned down. And I was getting quite a lot of associations, of course. And but what I wanted to ask is, reading and living are in some ways seems to be connected to each other, and what we read also not rule our life, but it's very important for our choices and for our lives. Is that some, do you agree, or do you have any?
Oui, bien sûr.
Yeah.
Oui, tout à fait, vous avez raison. Je me suis rendu compte, après avoir écrit 8 ou 10 romans, que décidément, il y avait beaucoup de gens qui s'écrivent, il y a beaucoup de lettres qu'on envoie, qu'on reçoit, il y a beaucoup de gens qui lisent, il y a des bibliothèques dans mes romans, sans que je l'ai décidé, c'est venu comme ça. Et ce sont des choses, la lecture, l'écriture, les lettres écrites, qui imposent une certaine lenteur, une attente, qui, je trouve, a quelque chose de très romanesque. C'est peut-être pour ça. J'ai aussi écrit des romans beaucoup plus contemporains, avec des emails et des SMS, bien sûr, c'est très intéressant. Il me semble que je suis plus à l'aise avec cette lenteur de la lettre écrite, du livre lu. C'est un goût personnel, donc sans que j'ai à le décider, je l'intègre à mon écriture, bien sûr. Et pour ce qui concerne la librairie de Le Chagrin du Roi Mort, moi aussi, ça m'a brisé le cœur de la faire brûler. Comme ça brise le cœur de faire mourir des personnages, parfois des romans. Mais c'est de la fiction, donc dans les fictions, on adore se briser le cœur aussi. Hein. Bien sûr.
Yes, certainly. Writing and reading is part of one's living. You're quite right. And I realized, in fact, after I had perhaps written my 10 novels, in fact, that I very often put in things like letters, libraries. They just were included in the things that I wrote without me actually intentionally doing so. It just happened like that. Also because letters and reading books impose a sort of slowness and deliberateness about reading. There's almost a Romanesque quality to that sort of book and that sort of reading. I do write also more contemporary things where we have emails and SMSs and messaging and so on. But I realize that I'm more at ease with the slowness and the deliberateness of letters and books. That's because it's my own personal taste. And with regard to the library burning down, well, yes, certainly that broke my heart as well, to see things like that burning. Also, like when you have to kill a character, it's something that you really don't want to do. But again, it's fiction, and sometimes also you have to break people's hearts.
Well, in Le Chagrin du Roi Mort, also it's winter, and of course there are landscapes, so there's ice, it's cold, and so on. And that was quite fascinating for us Swedes, sitting with your books in our room, discussing them. I was just wondering, just a short question, this fascination for winter and for these penetrating cold or mountains and snow and so on. If you just some reflection about that.
Peut-être qu'inconsciemment, je me suis dit, je vais écrire des romans de froid et que j'aurai une chance supplémentaire de remporter le Astrid Lindgreen Memorial Award, puisque ce sont des Suédois. Non, 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 pas du tout. J'ai un lien personnel ancien avec le froid, oui. J'ai grandi donc en Auvergne, dans ce petit village qui est à 600 mètres d'altitude. Et les hivers étaient très froids, il y avait beaucoup de neige, et ça a marqué mon paysage mental pour toujours. Je me revois aller à l'école à pied dans la neige, revenir en fin d'après-midi, la nuit commence déjà à tomber. Je marche dans la neige, j'ai froid aux doigts, et je vois ma maison là-bas, je vois la lumière. Je sais que là-bas, il y a ma mère et qui va me servir un cacao chaud avec des tartines. Et je trouvais ça très beau, cette recherche du chaud de toutes les façons, de la vraie chaleur, de la vraie température, mais aussi de la chaleur humaine. Et c'est vrai que j'ai essayé aussi d'écrire ensuite des romans de chaud, se déroulant dans des pays où on sue, on a chaud, il y a des moustiques, et ça ne marche pas. Mon imagination ne veut pas se mettre en route, alors que le froid m'inspire davantage. C'est vrai dans Le combat d'hiver, c'est vrai dans Le chagrin du roi mort, c'est vrai dans Le petit royaume. J'ai beaucoup de romans de froid. Donc, je suis d'autant plus émerveillé que tout ça trouve un écho aujourd'hui d'une façon spectaculaire avec la Suède et avec le prix Alma, bien sûr. Tout ça se rejoint comme par miracle et comme par enchantement.
In fact, I have definitely a personal link with being cold and the cold. I grew up and was born in Auvergne, which in a little village 600 meters above sea level, and there the winters are really very harsh. There's a lot of snow, and snow in the winter is part of my mental landscape. In fact, I still remember going to school, walking to school in the snow, and then when you come back in the afternoon, it's already dark, and I could see my home with the light on through the dark, and I knew that there was my mother who would offer me a hot chocolate and biscuits to eat. So and I find that very, very beautiful, and it's part of my mental landscape. And I've perhaps always been looking for this warmth also in terms of actual temperature, but also the human warmth that this entails. I did try writing a sort of novels in hot countries, hot novels, as set in the south with mosquitoes and so on, but it didn't really work. My imagination didn't really take off, whereas again it does with winter and the cold, as in Le Chagrin du Roi Mort and Le Petit Royaume. And I was very surprised, and I'm quite astounded that this has in fact resonated with readers and been such a success. And also, again, I think that, as I said at the very beginning, I mean, I perhaps might have written these things because I was hoping to get the Astrid Lindgren Prize, but I was only joking. But it really is part of my life. And I'm really very astounded that it has been so successful and resonated with everybody.
Thank you. I would like to move on to quite another novel, Terrienne, published in 2011, and which I think I was so taken by this novel. I think it's extraordinary. It's a kind of dystopia, if you like, sort of science fiction, but there's so much to read in this novel. There are so many metaphorical levels, and you can, well, it's about oppression, it's about resistance, and it's about, well, fighting for life, fighting for oxygen. And I thought that was quite, I mean, this last year, it was so, it's what is described in this novel is a sort of parallel world where it's forbidden to breathe. So there's a lot of things that you can sort of read in your own context or read in the society. So could you just please tell us about this novel, Terrienne? It must have been quite a big project, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. Comme toujours, chaque fois que j'ai achevé un roman, je suis dans le désespoir d'être capable d'en écrire un nouveau. Je pense toujours que je n'y arriverai pas, que ça ne sera pas aussi bien, que je n'y arriverai plus, que les gens pensent que je suis bon et ils vont bien voir que c'est pas vrai puisque je suis incapable d'écrire le suivant. Et pour ce qui concerne Terrienne, c'était ça. Je suis resté pendant des mois sans écrire. Je n'arrivais pas à démarrer une nouvelle histoire. Et un jour, je prends ma voiture et je roule entre ici, chez moi, et une petite ville voisine qui s'appelle Montbrison. Il pleut. Et je me suis dit, tiens, tu vas commencer un roman comme ça. Un type comme toi, un écrivain qui roule dans la pluie, qui est un peu découragé, et on verra bien. Et le soir, j'ai commencé à écrire ça. Et j'ai imaginé qu'il prenait en autostop une jeune fille qui a un scarabée dans sa main, et il dialogue. Elle lui demande « Que faites-vous » Il dit « J'écris des romans ». Il lui demande « Que faites-vous » Et la fille répond, et là, je vous jure, je ne sais pas d'où ça m'est venu. Elle lui répond « Moi, oh, je ne fais rien d'intéressant. Je cherche ma sœur. Je cherche ma sœur. Je cherche ma sœur. » Et là, oh, j'ai senti tout de suite dans mon ventre, j'ai dit « Oh, tu tiens ton roman, ça y est. » Et je n'en savais pas plus. Je ne savais pas où était cette sœur, ni pourquoi elle avait disparu, je ne savais pas. Et j'ai imaginé assez vite que je pourrais écrire un roman où on serait à la fois dans le très proche, pour moi, donc un roman qui se déroulerait là où j'habite, ici, aujourd'hui, dans mon quotidien, et en même temps très loin, plus loin que je ne suis jamais allé, c'est-à-dire dans un monde parallèle. Dans un même roman, mettre l'infiniment loin, l'infiniment proche. Ça m'a vraiment amusé. Et ensuite seulement, j'ai imaginé que ce monde parallèle, où la grande sœur avait disparu, serait un monde aseptisé, régulé, et dans lequel on ne respire plus. Parce que la respiration, ce sont les microbes, les virus. Je ne savais pas du tout à l'époque qu'on allait vivre avec le Covid. Bien sûr que non, je ne le savais pas. Mais c'était un peu prémonitoire, en effet. Et donc, ce monde parallèle, absolument aseptisé, d'une tristesse infinie. D'ailleurs, les habitants meurent d'ennui. Alors que tout paraît idéal. Il n'y a pas d'accident, il n'y a pas de maladie, il ne fait pas trop chaud, il ne fait pas trop froid. Donc ça pourrait paraître idéal. Et évidemment, moi je défends l'idée que notre Terre, avec tous ses défauts, le trop chaud, le trop froid, les maladies, la mort, c'est tellement incroyablement merveilleux et fascinant. Et on a tellement peur que tout ça s'arrête, ce carrousel incroyable d'odeurs, d'images. Moi, j'y pense tous les jours. Tous les jours, je me dis que tu es vivant, regarde, respire, écoute. C'est fabuleux. C'est ce que j'ai voulu dire dans ce roman-là. Ça n'est pas une dystopie dans laquelle j'ai voulu dire attention, regardez ce qui nous menace, on va aller vers un monde terrible. Non, c'était davantage un hommage à la terre, à notre terre, telle qu'elle est, avec ses défauts, et telle que je l'aime, C'est pourquoi le roman s'appelle tout simplement Terrienne.
Okay. As always, when I finish a book, when I finish a novel, I'm always plunged into great desperation because I don't think that I'll ever be able to write another one again. And people will say, you know, he's come to the end of the line, he can't write anything more. And that's a terrible fear that one has. And that was how Terrienne, in fact, started. It was like that. After I finished my previous novel, it was months that I hadn't done anything. I didn't feel I could do anything. But one day I was in the car and I was going on a road. It was raining. I was going towards a small town, Montbrison, and I was there in the car and I started thinking, it was cold, it was wet. I started thinking, well, this would be the beginning of a new story. And that very evening, in fact, I started thinking about the rain, about somebody who would be rather like myself in a place where I live, for example. And that was how the story, in fact, began. And I started writing it that evening. And I thought of this person, rather like myself, taking a young girl who was hitchhiking, and she asked him several things, you know, who are you? And he answered, and to the question to the girl of, you know, who are you, what do you do? She said, well, I don't really do anything. I'm looking for my sister. Just simply that's what came to me out of the blue. And I felt it really in my guts that was the story that I could write. That was the beginning of the novel. I'm looking for my sister. And I didn't know then exactly who the sister was, how things were going to pan out, but I knew that I had the story. And the novel is something that I wanted to place, as I said, very close to myself, where I live, everyday life, but also have another side to it, which was very distant, very far away. And therefore have in the same novel the infinitely close to one and the infinitely distant from one. And in fact, later then I developed this world where this sister had disappeared to or been kidnapped to. And this was a world which was incredibly organized and regulated, so much so that people in fact don't breathe in this world because there are no viruses. In fact, I had no inkling whatsoever that there was going to be the subsequent COVID crisis, perhaps, but it was rather a premonition, it would seem. This world that is parallel to us is aseptic, is infinitely sad. In fact, people die of boredom more than anything else. But it's a world that would seem ideal because there are no deaths, nobody gets sick, there are no accidents. It's neither too hot, it's neither too cold. But then again, I realized that in fact, this world of ours is so marvelous, where it is sometimes too hot, sometimes too cold, where there is death. And that's the fascinating and the marvelous thing about it. And I'm frightened that this, in fact, will come to an end, that our world will come to an end, that we must smell the smells, look at the things around us, and each day, in fact, look at this and enjoy our world. So this novel is not a dystopia in the sense of a warning as to, you know, the terrible world that we are leading ourselves into. It's rather a tribute to our earth, with all its warts, with all its defects, and it's a song of love, if you like, and that's why it's called Terrienne.
A tribute to this world, to this earth. That's wonderful. But I think we should move on to your latest book, not last. I'm so sorry. My mistake.
Hopefully.
Terrible. Your latest book, Jefferson, this wonderful book about a hedgehog. And I was just wondering to begin with, I will let you tell us about this book, but why a hedgehog? I was so intrigued by that. And also intrigued by the fact that he was going to the hairdresser to trim his little quiff. I had to look up hedgehogs in the dictionary to see that they are not pins, but there's a little thing, and that's what it's going to trim. So could you please just tell us about Jefferson?
Jefferson, l'idée m'en est venue à cause d'un souvenir très lointain. À nouveau, je dois impliquer ma fratrie. Pendant longtemps, j'ai partagé une même chambre avec mon plus jeune frère, le 6e donc. Et on se racontait des histoires tous les soirs. Je commençais une histoire, il continuait, je continuais, il continuait. Et un soir, l'un de nous deux a dit « ce serait un petit hérisson » et l'autre a continué, peut-être moi, je ne sais plus, qui voudrait aller chez le coiffeur. Et je me rappelle ce bonheur, cette jubilation d'avoir trouvé cette chose intéressante. Ce serait un petit hérisson, bon, c'est pas génial, qui voudrait aller chez le coiffeur. Tout de suite, l'imagination se met en marche. Et surtout si le coiffeur est allongé sur le carrelage avec ses propres ciseaux enfoncés dans la poitrine, bien sûr. Et alors, je ne sais plus ce qu'on a imaginé à l'époque comme suite à cette histoire, je l'ai oublié, mais je n'ai jamais oublié ce début et le plaisir d'avoir trouvé quelque chose de charmant et d'intéressant et d'excitant. Et des dizaines d'années plus tard, j'ai repensé à ce petit hérisson et je me suis dit, je vais reprendre l'histoire du petit hérisson qui voudrait aller chez le coiffeur et on verra bien. Et c'est ce que j'ai fait. Dans mon histoire, en réalité, bien sûr, Jefferson n'est pas un hérisson. Jefferson, c'est comme un être humain qui a une tête de hérisson, bien sûr. Mais tout de même, dans ce roman, il est question de notre rapport aux animaux. Ça n'était pas prévu. Je n'avais pas du tout prévu de traiter cette question-là. Non. C'est venu en écrivant. Mais il se trouve que je suis assez impliqué dans ce combat qui consiste à sensibiliser les gens à notre comportement vis-à-vis des animaux. Je ne suis pas végétarien strict, je ne mange plus de viande depuis 7 ans maintenant. Je mange encore du poisson, parfois des fruits de mer, mais je ne mange plus de viande du tout. Je trouve que nous ne sommes pas raisonnables, vraiment pas raisonnables. On en mange trop. Quand je vais dans les classes, je le dis aux enfants, ils sont d'accord. C'est les adultes qui ont un problème avec ça. Parce que, alors, je cite un chiffre, un seul. Moi, je suis plutôt une personne de lettres et de mots. Et les chiffres, je les oublie, mais il y en a un que je connais très bien et que je replace assez souvent, c'est 2 millions. Chaque jour, en France, on abat 2 millions d'animaux terrestres, pas les poissons, 2 millions d'animaux terrestres pour les manger. Chaque jour. C'est stupéfiant. Et sur ces 2 millions d'animaux, il y en a au moins 70% qui ont vécu des vies de détresse, de pure détresse, sans voir le ciel, sans avoir sous leurs pieds de l'herbe ou de la terre, parfois pour certains des cochons en particulier, sans pouvoir simplement se retourner. Je suis révulsé par ça, je ne supporte pas. Donc, je le dis, en essayant de ne pas être trop donneur de leçons, simplement parce que les gens ne sont pas des monstres, mais simplement ils ne savent pas ou ils ne veulent pas savoir. Mais, pardon, important aussi, Jefferson, mon roman Jefferson, ça n'est pas seulement ça. C'est aussi un roman policier joyeux, drôle, et que je me suis vraiment beaucoup amusé à écrire.
Okay. Jefferson, well, the idea of Jefferson came to me from a very long way back, and it goes back to the numerous brothers and sisters that I had. For several years, in fact, I shared a bedroom with my youngest brother, and he and I would tell each other stories. One would start and the other one would continue. And one day, I don't remember actually who started, said, well, you know, there was a hedgehog, and then the other person, either me or him, said, oh, he was going to the hairdresser or to the barber. And I remember the jubilation, the extreme joy of actually finding that start of a story of the hedgehog going to the barber. And because, of course, you know, the idea of a hedgehog going to a barber, and also the barber himself in an odd position with his scissors ready. I don't remember, in fact, how we ended or how we continued that story, but I do remember this beginning, and that came back to me 10 years afterwards when I remembered it and decided to do something about it. And I said, okay, this is how we're going to start a story. We'll see how it proceeds. Jefferson is not necessarily a hedgehog as such. He's a human being, if you like, with a hedgehog head. And also, it's a book about our relationships with animals, something that I had not foreseen at the beginning that I was going to talk about. It came as I was writing it. And it is also because I'm very much involved with trying to raise awareness of our behavior vis-a-vis animals and how we treat them so badly. I do not eat meat myself and haven't done so for about 7 years, although I do eat fish. So I'm not strictly a vegetarian, but I refuse now to eat meat, and in fact, when I go to classrooms and talk about this, the kids are usually always in agreement with me. It's the parents that perhaps don't agree, and I don't cite figures very often because I'm a man of letters, not of figures. But one figure I always do cite, and that's 2 million. In France, every day we slaughter 2 million animals who live on the earth, not fish, animals who live on the earth, in order to eat them. And I find that absolutely incredible. And of these 2 million animals, about 70% have lived their lives up to then in absolute suffering. They've never seen the sky, they've never walked on grass or on the earth. And I find that absolutely disgusting. And also pigs, for example, live in pens where they can hardly turn round. And that just revolts me. The novel, however, is not there just to preach and to give a lesson. It's also, you know, because I know that people aren't monsters and they just perhaps are not aware. And also, Jefferson is a detective story, and it's amusing. And I was very amused when I wrote it.
It's also very, because it's just as you said, it's a detective story. I mean, they work undercover and so on. I think you can think of many other stories of that kind, but then it turns all the time and becomes something else. And also this story about oppression and resistance, and how the animals' network of resistance, I found that just fascinating. So I have heard that you are writing on another book, perhaps not a sequel, but one more book about Jefferson. Is it true or?
Oui, c'est vrai, c'est vrai. Je suis en train d'écrire la suite de Jefferson. J'avais presque fini quand il s'est produit un événement qui m'a stoppé. Et cet événement, il s'appelle le Astrid Lindgreen Memorial Award, qui m'a vraiment... J'ai réussi à écrire pendant quelques jours encore après l'annonce, et puis après, je ne pouvais plus, parce que j'ai eu vraiment beaucoup de sollicitations, et que dans ma tête, j'étais ailleurs. Mais ça y est, je suis en train de m'y remettre, et j'aurai bientôt fini, oui. Et
Yeah.
voilà, je le fais avec grand plaisir. J'étais vraiment très heureux de retrouver mon petit personnage et ses amis.
Yes, certainly you're quite right. I am writing the sequel to Jefferson, and it's almost finished, but an event took place which rather stopped me in my tracks, and that is winning the Astrid Lindgren Award. And I wasn't really able to write very much. I've been very busy, and also I just wasn't there with my head. But soon, I promise, I'll be able to finish it, and it's with great pleasure, in fact, that I've found Jefferson once again and be able to write a sequel.
We are so looking forward to it, all of us, I think. I think that was my last question, or the last thing we can say. I think the time has run out. Thank you so very much, Jean-Claude Mourlevat, for this conversation. And I would also like to say that there's a presentation of Jean-Claude Mourlevat on the website of Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. And of course, you may also visit the website of Jean-Claude Mourlevat himself. N'est-ce pas? I think.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Boel. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.